The camera was still rolling. And nobody in that room expected what happened next. Because in 30 seconds of unscripted footage, the entire ideological fault line of modern Europe was exposed. No press release, no official statement, just a look. And that look said everything. It was June 14th, 2024. Borgo Egnazia, southern Italy, the G7 summit. The most powerful leaders on earth gathered under the Italian sun. Giorgia Meloni was the host. Her summit, her stage, her rules. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and she had won something that no one expected her to win. But then Emmanuel Macron walked down the line, and the cameras caught everything. Meloni watched him approach. Her expression did not change. It didn't need to, because what had just happened between these two leaders, behind closed doors, in working sessions, in the language of official documents, had already been decided, and Macron had lost. Here is what actually happened in the 48 hours before that look. The G7 summit was supposed to be about Ukraine, about artificial intelligence, about the global economy, but inside the negotiating rooms, a different battle was being fought. France wanted a single word in the final communiqué, one word: abortion. And for Macron, this wasn't just politics. 3 months earlier, France had done something historic. On March 4th, 2024, France became the first country in the world to enshrine the right to abortion in its constitution. It was Macron's personal achievement, his defining legacy. He had flown to Versailles for the vote. He had championed it across Europe, and now he was sitting at a G7 table watching the host nation erase the very language he had built his reputation on. For Macron, the G7 communiqué was not a diplomatic technicality, it was personal. The 2023 G7 summit in Hiroshima had included it explicitly. Leaders had committed to access to safe and legal abortion and post-abortion care. France, Canada, and the United States pushed to keep that language. Meloni refused. Italy held the rotating G7 presidency. Meloni controlled the draft, and she used that control. The word abortion was removed from the final text entirely. In its place, comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, carefully worded, strategically vague. Meloni had rewritten the document of the world's most powerful democracies to match her political agenda. Then something unexpected happened. Macron spoke to the press. Standing in front of cameras, the French president said he regretted Italy's position. He said France had enshrined abortion as a constitutional right. He said not every country shared that vision. He said he respected Italy's sovereign choice, but the word regret landed like a grenade. Meloni heard it, and she responded. Standing at her own press conference, Italy's Prime Minister did not look diplomatic. She looked like someone who had been insulted on her own turf. "I believe it is profoundly wrong," she said in difficult times like these, to campaign using a forum as valuable as the G7. She was accusing Macron of using a global summit to score points ahead of France's snap parliamentary election. She was telling him to stay in his lane. But the real confrontation wasn't in front of cameras. It happened the next day, when Macron walked down the line of leaders and reached Meloni. The footage shows everything and nothing at the same time. A handshake, a forced smile, and for just a moment, a stare. Not anger, not warmth. Something colder than both. The internet called it the death stare. But it was more than that. It was a message from the leader who had just rewritten the rules of the G7 to the leader who had tried to stop her. I won, and we both know it. But here is what nobody talked about. Because the death stare went viral, the memes spread, the headlines were everywhere. And in all that noise, the actual story got buried. Meloni hadn't just removed a word from a document. She had done something far more significant. She had proven that a right-wing government in Rome could dictate the terms of a global statement. She had outmanoeuvred France. She had outmanoeuvred Canada. She had outmanoeuvred the United States of America. And she had done it while smiling for the cameras. Pope Francis had attended the summit. Italy's agriculture minister, Meloni's own brother-in-law, said afterwards that perhaps it wasn't appropriate, with the Pope present, to include abortion in the text. The implication was clear. Meloni had not just used political pressure. She had used the symbolic weight of the Catholic Church. In a room full of secular democracies, she had played a different game entirely. And she had won. Elie Schlein, leader of Italy's main opposition party, called it a national disgrace. "We have no use for a female prime minister who does not defend the rights of all other women in this country," she said. But Schlein's words didn't change the final document. The word abortion remained absent. Macron's regret remained a soundbite. And Meloni's death stare remained on every front page in Europe. Here is what this moment actually revealed. The G7 is supposed to be the alliance of the world's leading democracies, a coalition built on shared values, human rights, women's rights, the rule of law. But look at who was sitting at that table in June 2024. Biden, fighting for his political life, abortion at the centre of his campaign. Macron, facing snap elections, his government crumbling at home. Trudeau, polling at historic lows in Canada. And Meloni, fresh from a landslide European Parliament performance, her party growing stronger across the continent. The balance of power in that room was not what the headlines suggested. The weakest leaders were the ones demanding more progressive language. The strongest was the one who had just taken it out. In June 2024, in a resort on the coast of southern Italy, one leader rewrote those shared values, and the others let her, because Meloni understood something the others didn't. Whoever controls the draft controls the outcome. She was the host. She held the pen. And when the final communiqué was published, her fingerprints were all over it. But let's go back to the room. Because what happened inside those negotiating sessions tells a different story than the one that went viral. The US delegation, under President Biden, had pushed hard to keep the abortion language. Biden had made reproductive rights a centerpiece of his re-election campaign. His team needed that word in the document. They needed it as a signal to American voters that the world's democracies stood together on women's rights. Meloni knew this, and she used it. By controlling the host nation's draft, she had put Biden in an impossible position, pushed too hard, and the summit collapses into a public fight. Accept the compromise and go home without the language. Biden accepted the compromise. The word abortion disappeared, and Meloni walked out of the summit having outmanoeuvred the President of the United States. Not through force, not through confrontation, through paperwork. This is how European power actually works. Not in speeches, not in press conferences, in the language of documents that most people never read. 1 year later, at the 2025 G7 summit in Canada, the cameras caught them again. Macron whispering, Meloni rolling her eyes, the same two leaders, the same tension. But the balance of power yet had shifted even further. France was in political chaos. Macron's government had collapsed and been rebuilt twice, and Meloni was still standing, stronger than ever. The death stare wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the beginning of something.